I'm 30 years old, and one of the only things that's ever really helped me clear my head is camping. Not campgrounds or national parks where there's other people around. I'm talking true middle of nowhere camping. I grew up in Northern California, and I've spent the better part of my adult life learning to find those remote little pockets where you can still feel like the only person left on Earth. This story took place a few months ago. I had just broken up with my ex, and let's just say I was going through it. I needed to be alone, so one day I just packed up my truck and headed out. I didn't have a specific plan. I just threw some gear together and decided to go back to a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river you could reach if you follow this barely there dirt road past a whole lot of nothing. I got there sometime in the late afternoon, but the second I turned down the dirt path that led to the river, my stomach sank a little. There were already two trucks parked near the trailhead, one gray and one white. I couldn't see anyone around, but just knowing other people were out there kind of killed the vibe for me. I hadn't driven all this way out in the middle of nowhere to interact with people. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should just turn around and find another spot. But I told myself it was a big stretch of river, and chances were whoever owned those trucks were camped far enough away that I wouldn't even see them. I hiked maybe 15 minutes downriver when I saw two guys fishing up ahead. They looked like the type you'd expect to see fishing. Thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots, but it seemed like they were more focused on something else. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me this awkward half smile. As I passed, he called out, saying something about how they were just target shooting cams and didn't mean to freak me out. I just gave a polite nod and kept walking without saying anything. As I kept walking, I couldn't help but replay the guy's comments in my head. It wasn't even what he said that bothered me. It was how rushed and awkward it came out, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I got that uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't quite add up, but I pushed it down. People out there weren't exactly known for their social skills. It wasn't that weird for rural folks to be a little off when it came to talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I found a spot a little further down the bend, where the trees were thicker and the trail dipped out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was tucked away enough that I felt like I had my own space. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started raining lightly not long after, so I threw on my rain jacket and kept at it, letting the sound of the river and the soft drizzle drown everything else out. Later, I wandered down to the rocks by the river's edge to reflect a little bit. That's when I noticed someone across the water. It was one of the guys from earlier, the one who had called out to me, only this time he was alone. He spotted me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back, figuring it was better to be friendly. He yelled across asking for my name. I don't know why, but I shouted back my real name, Anisha, without really thinking about it. He stood there for a second after I answered, then pulled something out of his jacket. At first I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. Before I could even process it, he held it up and took a picture of me from across the river, and then without another word, he just turned and started walking back up the riverbank like nothing had happened. I was beyond creeped out. The weird speech patterns and mannerisms were one thing, but taking a picture of me, that was next level strange. I headed back to my campsite and just figured I'd stay put for the rest of the night. After the sun went down, I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the breakup in my head, picking apart every word, every mistake, every what if. I don't know how long I lied there like that, just listening to the river and the light patter of rain against the tent. At some point, though, I started hearing something else. Faint, uneven sounds like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the rain or some animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps circling the campsite. And the second I made that connection, my stomach dropped straight through the ground. I didn't even have to wonder who it might be. I'm no fool. I never go into the woods alone without protection, and this was no exception. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my handgun from where I kept it tucked by my sleeping bag. Then I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I needed to stay calm. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the trees, and there he was, that creep from earlier, standing a few yards away. half hiding behind a tree. He wasn't smiling or scowling. He just had this blank expression on his face, like he wasn't all there mentally. The scariest part wasn't his demeanor though, but the fact that he was holding a small axe in his left hand. For a second I couldn't move. All I could think about was how far I was from anyone. How nobody would even hear me scream if it came to that. But somehow I managed to raise the gun and level it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though every part of me was screaming as sternly as I could. I said, "Leave now or I'll kill you." His facial expression didn't change at all. It was like my words meant nothing to him. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled something about how his friend Ivan had discouraged him from coming to find me, and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I fired a shot straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled a bit, clearly not expecting me to do that. I leveled the gun at him again, a little more confident now. I told him it was his last chance and to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. I told him to take his shoes off so that he'd have trouble following me, and then made sure he didn't have any other weapons on his person. Once I was sure he wasn't armed, I told him to go to my tent and grab my gear. I watched him like a hawk as he fumbled with my stuff, forcing him to toss it all out into the open where I could see it. I packed the essentials as fast as I could, never letting him out of my sight. I jammed the axe into my backpack and made sure I wasn't forgetting anything. I had to leave the tent behind, but that was a small price to pay for staying alive. I then grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness, and I told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept the light on him the whole time, and the moment he walked far enough out of sight, I turned and started hiking back up the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part of the whole encounter, stumbling through the pitch-black forest in the rain with a potential murderer behind me. I wasn't sure if he was following me, but I didn't care. I just kept going, trying to use the flashlight as minimally as possible. Both pickup trucks were still in the pullout when I finally made it back to my car. I didn't stop though. I threw everything in and sped out of there. When I got cell service back, I called the police and reported the whole incident, describing my location as best as I could. A few months have passed since then, and I'm not sure if anything ever came of it, but I'm not going out of my way to find out. What still scares me most about the whole thing is that comment he made about his friend Ivan, that he quote-unquote took care of him. I really don't want to think about what that means. But there's only so many explanations. I'm just glad I was armed. I could have easily lost my life that night if I hadn't been. This happened when I was really young. I'm talking second or third grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser or a dinner party or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night. But while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy, and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows. Keep at least one house light on. Make sure all the blinds were closed. Typical stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, so 3 hours minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant, enough for me to instantly make the connection, even at that young age. I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it. And I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone. So I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors, closed all the blinds, checked the windows. Even the light, everything was shut tight, which confused me a little because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat. So, I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so, there was a burst of lightning, followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was gonna fall in the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds every so often. There were these weird creaking sounds like shifting wood. Thing is, the entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer. So I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. I was 99% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak. I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-year journey. I immediately went downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table, like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but two bare feet walked into view. To nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor. And I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me with wide eyes. I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a standoff where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually, they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity, and then finally the front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after that. Part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age, where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it. The next morning, after making sure the front door was locked, I slunk back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out. I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it. So far removed from the incident, if I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with the night light from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark that didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson: lock your doors at night.